So the spray grazing video is actually part of a larger overarching project funded by MLA, which, as Lisa mentioned, is Less Weeds, More Feed. So the idea of the video was just to explore the consequences of like what can go wrong with spray grazing and what that looks like, and just to capture the media to support that and the literature that already exists. And then also just highlight how valuable a tool it is in your perennial pasture systems. So yeah, that's sort of an overview.
Anyone got any questions for Jess just yet? No? So what impact does this method have on grass species?
Yep, so the grass regrowth will be affected just because the leaf area is lower than desirable. So when those animals graze it, that surface area to capture light is dramatically reduced. And so like the bare ground has increased, and the clover will also just be checked for a little bit. So it's really important to just expect lower than normal pasture growth for the following 2 months after treatment. It's also really important is like once the animals come off the pasture, just rest it until at least 3 leaves per tiller have grown back on your perennial grasses.
So do the animals selectively eat the herbicide affected weeds because of that sugar transpiration?
Yeah. So how the process actually works is the herbicide will actually overstimulate weed growth, and as a result it actually converts the starch in the plant into sugar, which actually makes the plants more palatable to grazing stock. Also, it actually alters the growth rate and the cell development in the plants, which causes unregulated growth. It elongates, twists and thickens up. So it's going to be not only more palatable to grazing stock, but also more accessible to grazing stock because it's no longer growing along the ground, it's growing upright.
So timing is crucial, and maybe that's why we sometimes see failures with this method if we don't put enough stock on when grazing, when the herbicide is most effective. So how do we sort of mitigate that by watching the time?
Yeah, so once it's sprayed, the effect only lasts about 2 weeks. So if that plant isn't grazed, all those sugars and carbohydrates that have gone into the leaves will start returning back into the crown and the roots of that plant. So I think the real thing to be aware of is making sure that you have the grazing pressure to actually eat off that biomass once it's sprayed. And there are different ways to mitigate that if you don't have the stock numbers. So, it might be just run temporary fencing and just grazing half a paddock at a time, for instance. So, yeah.
Any questions from the crowd?
What would you suggest, Jess, would be a minimum number of DSE to the hectare to get the most benefit?
I think most of the literature tells us about five times your normal stocking rate. So, but practically speaking, it's just what biomass you have there and what number of head to consume that within 2 weeks. So yeah, it's just what's available in your system and how many animals you have to eat that in a short period of time.
Which can be a juggle in winter when we're trying to spread lambs around over small numbers, small mob numbers and low stocking rates.
Yep, absolutely.
Scott?
And that's one of the reasons why in both these videos, the sequential nature of how you're trying to achieve these aims is really important. I tend to think that you can't do the whole place at once. You know, there's certain paddocks you're going to have to look after when you've when you're upping your clover numbers. There's certain paddocks where you really want to hammer with spray grazing. One of the methods we chose at one stage in more extensive areas was to spray graze half the paddock, or spray half the paddock in a sequential nature, and you could actually get large numbers of stock to head to the high sugar sprayed part and then spray the other half, and they move back over to the other half. So it is possible to achieve some of these outcomes without actually using a fence by splitting the time a bit. This is a great example of you can't solve the whole world at once.
Yeah. So just going off Scott's comment, so we actually, the farm that we did this demonstration on last year, the farmers sort of saw what was happening and then scaled that out to a paddock application. So it was a bit later in the season, and he used 500 mil of Agritone 750, and then it was a little bit later the sheep went in because we had a grazing alert, a grazier's alert, sorry. But there was 222 ewes and 312 lambs straight off marking went into the treated paddock. It was 9 hectares, and those lambs in 21 days had a growth rate of 410 grams. There was no scouring, illness or deaths recorded. The ewes maintain a good condition score. So, you know, there's ways we can play with it. So early in the season, obviously we're lambing, we want those smaller mob sizes for our survivability. But, you know, in times like marking or leading into weaning, you know, there's opportunities there where we can use our animals in our bigger mob sizes.
So how often would you need to be using this technique in your paddocks, or if done correctly, would you obtain full control of your weeds after one season?
So spray grazing, it's really effective on annual broadleaf weeds with short seed viability. So our target weeds here, which is like capeweed and erodium and some thistles, they have a seed viability of about 3 years. So all we need to do is just interrupt that seed development for a couple of consequential years, and we've greatly reduced that weed seed bank in the soil. So you can use this technique in back-to-back years. However, it really has to be weighed against your clover content, your presence of annual grasses, and also, most importantly, the desirable species that you have there. So obviously we're trying to create an environment that fosters the growth of our perennial grasses to fill the spaces that are left by the decaying weeds. So yeah, just make those assessments as each year comes along.
And using pasture competition is your key there. You've got to have that grasses and clovers to replace what you've taken out. So
yep, absolutely. Yep.